Hey guys, welcome back to this week's news breakdown. My name is Abe. Welcome to Coffee Economics. Today we're going to be talking about Kenya's deal with Iran, which is an interesting one. We're also going to be looking at Egypt's IMF deal plus privatization, complicated arrangement, which will be really interesting to break down. And as well, the first report that we're going to look at is a UN report looking at the impact of debt on development in developing countries, and really want to just break down some lessons that we can learn from that. And yeah, let's get into it. So the first report we're going to look at is by the UN, which looks at how many nations, particularly developing nations, are paying more in debt repayments over spending on education and health, which is quite worrying. So what the UN has found is that about 3.3 billion people live in countries that are spending more on their interest repayments rather than on health and education, which are really important for future growth of an economy. Through, if you're healthy, you'll be able to work longer. If you've got education, you can get high-paying jobs. You have the ability to, engage in the economy, be more innovative. So if you don't have those things, your country is pretty much going to be a low-growth economy for quite a long time, because these things are generational. And one of the things that they've come across is that there's been a lot of debt. But let me first start with one way that we can see debt, and I'll kind of break down my argument here, is that maybe these countries actually have gotten debt that is actually good for the economy, that's going to help grow the economy. And this is just a temporary thing. This debt is a bit too high for now compared to their debt repayments are a bit too high now. They're spending a lot on that than health and education. But in the long run, these debts are, have built infrastructure that's needed, hospitals that's needed, roads that's needed, and that will help the economy. And, if your economy is able to raise revenue, then you can pay your debt repayments and also do your education and healthcare spending. So it might be a win-win situation. But what they have found is that for many of these countries, that was not how they were using that debt. It was mainly for short-term things. One of the reasons for the heavy debt burden is that many countries had to borrow just to keep themselves afloat during COVID. And now with the whole Ukraine war and supply chain issues from COVID causing prices of things to go up, it's also made the value of many of the developing countries' currency fall, which means that they have to pay more to repay that debt. So Africa's debt situation is not something new. It's been something that I think started in the late 70s. So really after Africa started becoming independent, many African countries started getting out of colonialization, and they got really good loans. But then a few things happened that caused those loans to not be so good anymore for those African countries, and there was a lost decade of economic growth. And we might be on the precipice of that again with this new debt issue. There's still a couple of conditions that are not going to cause that, but the longer this drags on, the more we're likely going to see like the defaults that happened to Zambia and Ghana. One thing we can learn from this is that as African economies, we need to be a bit more savvy about how we borrow money to be things that are more productive, when things are more productive. And that kind of falls on us as Africans and those who are in policy making roles within African governments, and also really for our politicians really to set the standard that they trust their public service to make good choices for them and empower people who have got the brains, the capacity to lead their government institutions, who will give them the best advice. This might surprise you. I think Africa has got some of the best politicians, whether you think they have the best leadership style or not, but the fact that they can be able to rally people around them and get voted in. And I know there's a bit of corruption also happening there with vote rigging, vote buying. But for the fact that for someone to get to that level of being able to be even in parliament, they have to be a very, very good politician. So I think despite all the corruption and stuff like that, I'm going to make a separate video on my thoughts about corruption, which might be interesting to you guys for you to hear. But let me not get sidetracked. So I think one of the learnings that we can get from this is that as Africans, we need to be a bit more savvy about who we borrow from and why we borrow from, and borrow in terms that make sense to us, because some of these loans were for long-term projects, for projects that will have long-term benefits, but those benefits will only come in the long term. But we need to pay the debt in the short term, which creates this gap where you're not raising the money to pay off these loans. The other factor is external, which is around that African countries tend to pay more, have a high interest rate compared to other countries. For example, here it says that, as an example, African countries that on average pay 4 times more for borrowing than the United States. So if the United States has a 1% interest, most African countries pay around a 4% interest. And even worse, we pay 8 times more than the wealthiest European countries. If you think about it, you think it kind of makes sense. African countries are risky, so they should pay more in interest rate. But that does not make sense as well, because these are countries, these are not individuals or companies where, if they don't make money, they fall over, they go bankrupt. There's people involved in here. These people can't just, move on to a new company or a new job. People love where they live, or cannot just move from where they live, or that sort of thing. So it's a very interesting kettle of fish to think about, and I've got a new video coming out on this, which I'll talk about this. It's going to probably come out next week, so watch out for that. But this is one of the key issues, that Africa tends to pay more debt or have higher interest repayments than other countries, which is not right, I think, because it doesn't make sense for countries to pay 4 times or 8 times other countries. Like I said, they're not individuals. They're not companies that can go bust if they don't make profit. Countries are a different entity on their own. I think the interest rate spread, that's the difference between the top and the bottom, it's just too much. So I think that's one of the more systematic factors that we need to fix as African countries. How we do that is, there's a couple of ways that can be done. It's either by lobbying the credit rating agencies, being more aggressive in our negotiations with private lenders, particularly those type of institutions, that, hey, we can't be paying this much money, it doesn't make sense. And I do touch on this on a massive deal that just happened recently, and I'll talk about this in the video that's going to drop next week, God willing. So the levels of debt don't make sense. And really, I think as African countries, what we need to be thinking about is forward planning, how we want to borrow and why we want to borrow. And sometimes it's really hard for new political leaders if they inherit an issue that was not their own. This is the case in point for Kenya, case in point for Zambia, because those two guys are fairly new to ruling the country. It's more Ruto than Zambia's president, but they've entered into a situation where they had Ruto was in government before, but they entered into a situation where they are now having to deal with something that was not directly their own making, and probably policy failure from the past, or policy negligence from the past, I should say. So I think as we need to be able to sort of build strategically a platform forward of how we are going to borrow, criteria for what we're going to borrow on, and stick to it. I think that's one of the issues that are sticking point for Africa. We have all these great plans that are already written out, but we tend to do what we like when we like, and then it ends up hurting us, and that's going to be the next story that I want to talk about. So moving on to Egypt. So Egypt is going to sell some of its assets, going to sell $1.9 billion in assets, and through making those assets private assets. So these are state-owned companies now being sold to private individuals so that they can get money, so that they can help the economy. According to this article, one of the reasons why Egypt is in trouble is that they've got high debts because of, all this borrowing during the COVID period, and borrowing prior to COVID that might have not been such great borrowing. Plus also the currency has fallen in value, and Egypt tends to import a lot, particularly wheat, which is one of the things that was coming out of the Ukraine, and that has become super expensive, and the value of the currency has gone down, making it even more expensive as well. So Egypt is struggling, and the IMF has given them a deal, a $3 billion loan to help them out so that their economy doesn't crash and all that sort of thing. To be honest, I think this is not, let me be measured. I think this is probably what they feel they need to do. I think they've been pushed into a corner because of what's happening in the economy, and they need to do this. The issues I have with this, I have no issue with privatization per se, because all economic policy has got its pros and cons. There's reasons why you would do privatization over reasons why you wouldn't do privatization. It all depends on context. It all depends on what's happening and whether you have got the right platform to do privatization. With the case of Egypt, it's likely that they are going to have to sell as quickly as possible. They have to rush through these deals. And if you rush through these deals, the people who have got the capacity to buy these assets tend to be probably foreign nationals, other multinational companies that are going to probably run these companies in the interest of making profit and in the interests of their shareholders, which are likely not to be Egyptians, because probably Egyptians don't have shares in this company per se. So what that means is that, depending with the type of company, right, it could mean cost cutting, which means lower quality for the Egyptian people. For some, it might mean that it actually might be better off because that service needs innovation for you to be productive, to be able to compete in the market. But this is ownership being taken away from the Egyptians to someone else who is not an Egyptian, who does not live there, who might not even have any interest in what's happening in Egypt, might not even set foot in Egypt might not even set foot in Egypt at any time in their lives. There's two things. One, first, on the privatization front is that as Africans, we really need to be able to develop the capacity of our own people to be able to be entrepreneurs on a global scale, so that if the government says we don't really need to own this asset anymore, there is possibility that someone can buy it from within their own nation. So enabling that there be a local buy-in into those state assets. For example, if one of the wind farms or one of the energy projects gets bought by an Egyptian, probably they'll have more connection to Egypt than someone outside the country. Hey, it might not be the case, because people can be greedy and just want to do different things. But at the same time, they broke it up and in a certain way so that the assets can be split or done something of that sort that allows people with the capacity from Egypt to buy those assets. I think it would have a different impact on the country. It will still have that flavor of being owned by the people of the country. And also, this article mentions about the wheat being an issue that Egypt has, having to import a lot of its wheat into the country. So I think Africa could have helped Egypt here. If you think about it, there's quite a lot of fallow land, so land that is underutilized in Africa, that could maybe be ideal for growing wheat. So what I'm trying to say is that probably the wheat that Egypt is getting could have also been something that's farmed within like a neighboring African country and sent to Egypt. And guess what? They'll be better off, right? If you make a deal like you buy the wheat in the Egyptian currency, then they don't have this pressure on the local currency. So in a sense, because of our underdevelopment as a continent, we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot when trouble comes. We are pushed to these desperate situations of having to privatize or sell assets that maybe are better in public hands over private hands, and having to pay more than what we need to pay. Yeah, just some food for thought for you guys in regards to that story. Hopefully this deal does help Egyptians. I think that's the main thing that should be the outcome from this deal, and that it will help the economy stabilize and have good results for the country. So the last story I want to talk about is the Kenya-Iran kind of 5 memorandums of understanding deal. So the the leader of Iran has come, or president of Iran has came and signed a deal with the Kenyan president Ruto, and it's on the surface of it, it's a good deal. So Iran is going to, or let me talk about Kenya's side. Kenya is going to be able to export more of its products, particularly the agricultural outputs, to Iran. So your teas, your meats, and the like will be able to be. They'll have more access to the Iranian market, which is really good news for Kenya, which is a country that is trying their best to raise revenue as fast and fast as they can and as much as they can, so that they don't have to go into a debt default. And this is a great deal for Iran, because they're getting access to these products probably at a better rate than what they would be paying for with other kind of exporters of these products. And also they're going to be doing some deals in Kenya, so it's not a one-way deal. Iran is going to probably set up like a motor vehicle plant in Kenya. It's going to try and connect with the young people there and connect them through the innovation hubs, the Iranian innovation hubs and the like. So there'll be some interesting ties, and whether this deal is going to be beneficial for Kenya or Iran is something that's to be explored. But some things to consider here is that Kenya is going to be selling commodities that are not what I would term as very high value, whereas Iran is going to be selling products that are high value, like its cars, innovative stuff that are more resilient to economic shocks or commodity market changes, compared to like things like your teas and your meats and your products, which are prone to like droughts or flooding or all that sort of thing. So it's an interesting deal that Iran is helping itself becoming more industrialized, get more foothold in terms of its high value products, where Kenya is going to be sending less produced products in a sense. But I could be wrong. Maybe Kenya is going to send some produced products, like maybe it could be fully packaged tea, it could be meat that is very high quality that sits at the premium end. It could be other products that could be processed and be sent out. Hopefully that's the case. Hopefully it's not just mostly raw products just being sent out at the cheapest price that they can get, or that they can send them to Iran. So one counter argument is that by Iran having its motoring facilities there and the innovation hub there, is that it builds the capacity of the young people there, which I hope will be the case. And hopefully as well, it also allows, this deal does not hamper the development of local entrepreneurs in the sector. Like if there's young and up and coming vehicle manufacturers in Kenya, hopefully they're not going to get the raw end of the deal, because now Iran wants to make cars in Kenya. And hopefully there'll be no market barriers to young entrepreneurs in the different fields, particularly the tech side and also the motor vehicle side as well. But on the surface of it, it's a good deal. I think what Ruto is doing again is kind of showing he's really engaged within the economic leadership of his country, which is something that is really good to see. Hopefully his engagement over time will grow will grow further into the EAC, and encouraging his other fellow leaders also to be very innovative and forward thinking in terms of economic growth for their own countries within that economic bloc. But that's great news. So that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll catch you guys in my next one. Bye.